Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. All right. So what I'll do is I'll make a short, like half an hour presentation, and then we can do some question and answers. And since it's also like evening is a rather busy time for the newspaper, we'll kind of uh, keep it short and crisp, if I may suggest. So without further ado, I'll just start. Since the topic is about political representation of women, let me start with a really sort of memorable conversation I had with the late Sushma Swaraj. This was in 2008, when the UPA government had just introduced a bill to reserve one third of the seats in the Lok Sabha and the state assemblies for women. Uh, the government was struggling to sort of introduce the bill because its own alliance partners, primarily the Rashtriya Janata Dal, were opposed to the bill. But Sushma had been a strong advocate for women's reservation within her own party, the BJP. So while the UPA's own constituents were in opposition, three women in different parties, Sonia Gandhi in the Congress, Sushma in the BJP, and Rida Karat in the CPM, they pushed for bipartisan support in the Lok Sabha for the UPA's bill that started in 2008. We'll come to that bill and its background a little later, but let me go back to a little known fact here. Actually, Sushma Swaraj, BJP, you would expect them to be a socially conservative party, but Sushma actually entirely on her own drove an amendment in the BJP's own party constitution, which that amendment provided for 33% reservation for women at every level of the BJP's organization. Now, it's another matter that this requirement has not been strictly followed by the BJP since 2008 when it was passed. But Sushma, during her lifetime, kept pushing not just for more space within the party organization, but also for more ticket allocation for women by the BJP, etc. So I sort of remember asking Sushma how her efforts were helping, especially by then, in the context of the various controversies that had arisen about the reservation that already existed at the panchayat level and the local body level for women, and this phenomena of what is called sarpanch patis, or the husbands of the women sarpanches, had arisen, as in they were the ones really in charge, and women were mere proxies and so on. And it was kind of dismissed that women are just there as a face. The real power lies with the men and so on. And let me give you a little background here. We go back to the 73rd Amendment in 1992, which established a three-tiered sort of panchayat system with regular elections throughout India. It also mandated that one third of the total number of seats reserved under Clause 1 of this amendment shall be reserved for women belonging to scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Additionally, it said that no less than one third, including the number of seats reserved for women belonging to SC and STs, of the total number of seats in every panchayat shall be reserved for women. Then came the 74th Amendment in the case of urban local bodies such as municipal corporations, municipal councils, and nagar panchayats. In 2009, the government introduced the Constitution 110th Amendment Bill in the Lok Sabha to increase reservation for women from one third to one half, which is 50% at the panchayat level and local body level. So while this bill was never passed in the Lok Sabha, the states had by then started stepping in. In Bihar, for instance, in 2006, it became the first state to increase the reservation in panchayats and local bodies to 50% under Chief Minister Nitish Kumar. Subsequently, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Uttarakhand passed laws to increase reservation for women in panchayats to 50%. And right now, there are 21 states in the country which have 50% reservation for women at the panchayat. Now, criticism of this legislative action has been throughout that it's actually the men in charge and who are running the show from behind, and women are proxies, that they're just rubber stamps. So I kind of asked Sushma how she sees this whole critique, because it strikes at the very heart of providing the reservation for women, and it kind of delegitimizes this whole process of empowerment and getting women into decision-making bodies and giving them authority position and then bringing them into legislature. And so she said to me that, when they first come, naturally it's an alien development, especially in a village. It's an alien development for the family, for the community, for the village. But and she said that I've seen it myself, that it changes gradually, slowly. The position becomes normalized for women around the sarpanch, in the family and in the villages. It becomes sort of normal to see a woman sarpanch, and to have to think that it's normal for a woman to be in a position of authority, especially in the Hindi heartland, sort of northern plains, in Bihar, in UP, in Madhya Pradesh. For a woman to be in a position of authority, it's really big. And she said, you imagine the impact it has on the rest of the women in the village. Forget about women in her own families and her daughter, who will then sort of step out a little more, exercise authority a little more, and so on. So we have to normalize women being in positions of authority, and now research is increasingly showing that they are gaining control and they are better sarpanches. That's what Sushma said to me. And more than anything else, you imagine a situation without such a legislative measure. So how long would it take for a village to have a woman sarpanch, and the change it brings without the reservation policy being in place? And so that made me think, and you go back to to various studies. There's a particular study by Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which shows that this particular legislative action has changed. It has paved the way for election of around 1 million women at village, block, and district levels. And this study shows that it's a sort of a landmark. It's a watershed. They proved that women in villages with reserved pradhans, like women pradhans, are twice as likely to have addressed a request or a complaint to the gram pradhan in a period of 6 months. There were other subsequent studies. A 2010 study published by India Policy Forum, organized by the NCAER. It noted that villages with female leaders experienced increased female participation and responsiveness to female policy concerns. The study also found that the village councils with reserved female leaders invested more in drinking water infrastructure, in sanitation, in roads, in school repairs, health center repairs, and irrigation facilities. So these were all visible changes that were found at the ground. Although patriarchy is a difficult mold to crack. It changes gradually. Sometimes it doesn't change. Change is not linear. It's intermittent. It's ups and down. But this particular measure had these visible sort of concrete changes. So while this is still a work in progress, we come to the representation in lawmaking bodies, in parliament and state legislatures, where it continues to be exceptionally abysmally low in India, particularly. So the present Lok Sabha, the 17th Lok Sabha, for instance, barely has about 81 women MPs, a little over, just maybe about 14% of the total strength of 543. The Rajya Sabha has barely 13% women. An interesting feature to note here is a party like the Trinamool Congress in the Lok Sabha, a party led by a woman, Mamata Banerjee, has as many as 39% women MPs. which is quite credible. And But it's another party, it's another regional party, Naveen Patnaik's Biju Janata Dal, which has the highest, about 42% women MPs. So TMC and BJD are two parties which not only have got women elected, but they also fielded a large number of women. In fact, the maximum number of women in the Lok Sabha elections. That's the situation at the local level. The state legislatures, in fact, fare even more poorly. For instance, 19 assemblies in India have less than 10% women lawmakers. No state in the country has more than 20% women reservations, 20% women MLAs. Here there is disparity. Like Chhattisgarh has the highest representation with about 18% women MLAs. Himachal Pradesh has only one woman MLA, and Mizoram Assembly has no woman MLA. So if you compare our home situation globally, we are really right at the bottom, even below the Middle Eastern and North African countries, where the average percentage of women in legislature is about 16%. And remember, I mean, we have Lok Sabha is 14%, Rajya Sabha is 13%, and state assemblies and legislatures are on an average 10%. So in Middle Eastern and North African countries, the average of women in legislature is 16%. It's in fact much higher in sub-Saharan Africa. It's about 26%. A country like Rwanda, for instance, has a women majority parliament with over 16%. But that is sort of an exceptional case because of the ethnic massacres that have taken place between Hutus and Tutsis there, that have disturbed the sex ratio in this particular country. But there are other countries like Cuba, for instance, where women outnumber men. There are 56% women in Cuba in the legislature, in the national legislature. In Nicaragua, it's 52%. Then you have countries like New Zealand, Mexico, Andorra, and even surprisingly, United Arab Emirates, which have an even gendered split, as in 50%. While countries like Iceland, Costa Rica, Sweden, South Africa, they follow close behind. United Arab Emirates, in fact, did not have any woman in the Federal National Council before 2006. But it kind of achieved gender parity in 2019 following a presidential decree. In India, we are sort of at 14%, which is quite high compared to the previous Lok Sabhas that we had. We've been struggling for now 27 years since the United Front government introduced in Parliament a bill to secure women's reservation. That was in September 1996. This was the Constitution 81st Amendment Bill. It was a surprise move in this 17-party coalition, and many of the constituents were almost actually violently opposed to the bill. So the moment it was introduced, it was referred to a joint committee, which was headed then by the CPI's Geeta Mukherjee. This committee had some strong women representation. Along with Geeta Mukherjee, who was an exceptional parliamentarian in her own right. It had Mamta Banerjee, it had Meera Kumar, it had Sushma Swaraj, it had Sumitra Mahajan, it had Uma Bharati, it had Girija Vyas, along with Nitish Kumar, Sharad Pawar, and Vijay Bhaskar Reddy, other constituents of this committee. And they came up with the basic structure of this bill. They had some 7 major suggestions to the proposed bill, and they especially felt that the bill which proposed not less than 1/3 percentage of women in Parliament with regard to reservation was vague. They suggested that it be substituted by as nearly as maybe 1/3. They also suggested that there should be reservation of seats for women in the Rajya Sabha and also the legislative councils at the state level, and even stated that the benefit of reservation to the other backward classes should be considered at the appropriate time. It was this committee's recommendation that the provisions governing the reservation of seats for women in the Lok Sabha and the state assemblies should be for a period of 15 years from the date of commencement of the act, with them being reviewed after a period to decide whether reservations should continue or not continue. But there were strong dissenting voices within this committee as well. And among them was Nitish Kumar, the current Bihar Chief Minister, who then proposed a very famous dissent note, which spoke of reservation for OBC women. And he said the bill provides for reservation to women belonging to SCs and STs. And I'm of the opinion that women belonging to OBCs should get their fair deal. So therefore, I want that 1/3 reservation should include women belonging to the OBC communities. The reservation should be in proportion to the population of OBCs. So what you see now in terms of Nitish Kumar pushing a caste census, he has been consistent with that line of logic since then. So this bill was taken up for discussion in the Lok Sabha on May 16, 1997, but there was absolute ruckus and pandemonium in the House. The ruling coalition members were the most vociferous. This was the discussion where, if you remember, I don't know, some of you are maybe too young to remember this, but I remember it very clearly. At that time, people like Sharad Yadav and Mulayam Singh Yadav made some really sexist remarks and about women, about modern women, so-called women with their hair cut. They call them parkati mahilaएं, and they said, who is a woman and who is not, and only short-haired women we won't allow them. Basically, women with short hair, a euphemism for educated and modern women, would dominate the legislatures if the bill was passed, and that they will not allow. So, I mean, all of this made headlines, and leaders from the Hindi heartland joined in and opposed the bill owing to the OBC subquota demand. And the United Front government could not pass the bill. It lapsed after the dissolution of this Lok Sabha. Then came the BJP led NDA government, the Atal Bihari Vajpayee government, between 1998 and 2004. And Vajpayee tried to get the bill passed multiple times. They tried to push the bill in 2000, in 2002, and 2003, but they had no success despite support from the Congress and the left on this bill. There was bipartisan support in Parliament, but they could not pass the bill. Then comes the UPA years, which I would say gained some headway. They, the Congress started with the common minimum program, which said that they will take the lead to introduce the legislation for 1/3 reservation for women in Vidhan Sabhas and Lok Sabha. Then President, I remember APJ Abdul Kalam, he reiterated the government's commitment in his first joint address to Parliament in 2004. But it was not easy, since a lot of the UPA's key constituents included the Hindi heartland parties, particularly the Rashtriya Janata Dal. RJD chief Lalu Prasad Yadav was then very powerful. He was railway minister. They were completely opposed to the bill. In 2008, the UPA government finally introduced the bill on May 6, 2008. And I was in Parliament at that time, and I remember massive scene. Before the law minister, he was Hansraj Bharadwaj at that time, he could even rise. The Samajwadi Party MPs, they kind of rushed towards him. They tried to snatch the bill. They tried to tear up the bill. Then the women, I remember the Women and Child Development Minister, Renuka Chaudhary, along with some other women, they tried to block him physically. They cordoned off so all sorts of scenes went on. And it was quickly introduced, but there was no discussion at that point, and it was later referred to the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Law and Justice. And this committee again sought to reserve as nearly as maybe 1/3 seats in the Lok Sabha and the Legislative Assembly for women, provide 1/3 the number of seats reserved for SC/STs in the Lok Sabha and state assemblies for women of these categories, and so on. This committee came out with this report in 2009 and recommended that the bill be passed without any delay. But again, there was a lot of ruckus. The copies of the bill were torn. People jumped into the well, and so on. But again, we saw a breakthrough in 2010. The RJD at that point was no longer a part of the government. They were giving outside support along with the SP to the UPA government. And after 2 days of really good discussion in the Rajya Sabha, the government managed to pass the bill in the upper house on March 9th. It was during the budget session. They passed the bill by over 2/3 majority. The BJP and the left, who were in opposition, they supported it. And almost 186 MPs in favor, and only one opposing vote, which came from Sharad Joshi, if I remember correctly. But even though it got passed in Rajya Sabha, the UPA did not have the political sort of heft to push it in the Lok Sabha, and that time kind of passed. Then arrives the BJP on the same scene in 2014, and since 2014, it's almost nearly 9.5 years. BJP has chosen to bring the bill only towards the fag end of its second tenure. They called an extraordinary session of Parliament this September, and they've kind of very grandly called this bill Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam, or the Constitution 128th Amendment Bill. It was introduced, and it has bipartisan support. So there was no question that the bill will be passed, because BJP anyway has a majority in the House. And if we look at this particular bill, which has now been notified as an act in the Gazette, it's sort of after Article 330, a fresh Article 330A has been introduced to mandate: 1, seats shall be reserved for women in the House of the People; 2, as nearly as maybe 1/3 of the total number of seats reserved under Clause 2 of Article 330 shall be reserved for women belonging to SC/STs; and 3, as nearly as maybe 1/3, including the number of seats reserved for women belonging to SCs and STs, of the total number of seats to be filled by direct election to the House of People shall be reserved for women. It comes with a sunset clause of 15 years. So reservation, as far as the statute provides, is only for 15 years, but it can be extended by Parliament. This deadline can be extended. Seats reserved for women will be rotated after each subsequent delimitation exercise. And there are similar, so this particular provision that I cited is repeated for state assemblies as well as the Assembly of National Capital Territory of Delhi. So a reservation extended for all these assemblies. But the biggest problem with this bill, regrettably, is that the government has tied the implementation of this bill to 2 exercises of delimitation and census. Now, surely the logic for this is, although the Home Minister explained it, saying, how will we identify the reserved seats? It has to be the Delimitation Commission, because government will not do this identification, because you will accuse us of bias and taking away your constituencies. He gave an explanation, but it still does not make any sense, because the number of women will remain 50%. Whether you do census or delimitation, the number of women in any geographical territory will remain 50%. Of course, I mean, there are discrepancies and changes in sex ratio, but by and large 50%. So how census and delimitation come into the picture? And the bill has provided for it. It inserts Article 334A(1) in the Constitution, which says, notwithstanding anything in the foregoing provision of this part or part 8, the provisions of the Constitution relating to the reservation of seats for women in the House of the People, the Legislative Assembly of a state, and the Legislative Assembly of the National Capital Territory of Delhi shall come into effect only after an exercise of delimitation has been undertaken for this purpose, after the relevant figures for the first census taken after the commencement of the Constitution 128th Amendment Act 2023 have been published and shall cease to have an effect on the expiration of a period of 15 years from such commencement. So very clearly, this cannot take place before the census has taken place and delimitation has taken place. Now, the issue is complicated. The decadal census, because of COVID, etc., has already been inordinately delayed and is unlikely to be undertaken until sort of much after the next general elections, which is 2024. So far as the delimitation, and that is census, that will again take its own time. And so far as the delimitation exercise is concerned, there has been the 91st Amendment to the Constitution in 2001, which has sort of frozen the total number of seats in the Lok Sabha till 2026. So even after the 2026 freeze, the delimitation exercise, so the delimitation exercise is supposed to kickstart only after 2026. Now, even in that, it's politically fraught because southern states are already sort of simmering and they're objecting to the more populous northern provinces. There are already figures that depict that Uttar Pradesh, which now has 80 Lok Sabha seats, after the delimitation exercise, it will have 120 Lok Sabha seats. So politically becoming much more powerful. So the argument that is coming from the southern states is, because we have controlled our population, we are going to be punished with lesser number of Lok Sabha seats, and the northern parts will become even more powerful. So that's sort of politically fraught exercise. With the more populous northern provinces cornering a larger number of seats in the House of the People, how it's going to unfold, one doesn't know. So on paper, effectively, it looks like the reservation for women in legislatures has been postponed at least till 2029. So unless the government amends this particular provision, this historic process is, in a sense, is in a state of freeze. How that will unfold, I cannot say. But for the moment, we have a law. It has been notified, although its implementation is in a state of suspension. So that is where we're at. Now, I could go on talking, but I would like some interaction, if I may. If you could ask some questions and so on, I would be more at ease. Does anyone have any questions? Do I see any raised hands? Please go ahead. Please ask your questions. I can see several.
In connection with the representation in the local self-government,
Yeah.
In the last part of this conversation, you were mentioning about the constitutional premise to which the kind of allocation of seats needs to be made. This is not exactly a question of reservation. It is actually a case of allocation from a different point of view.
Yeah.
So there is a long-standing demand. My precise question is that how do bring in the constitutional premise in connection with the PRIs? That is my very precise question. Secondly, in India, at the local level before independence, also the proportionate representation has been a major demand, and we have seen it through and through in many situations in India, including Kerala, through the submissions of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And uh, uh, and have you made any kind of study on such local tendencies? This is my second question. Thank you.
I did not quite understand local tendencies for what.
I think in different parts of India, there
Yeah.
were strong demands for representation of unrepresented communities.
Yes.
And, so I wanted to know whether you have made any kind of study on such. The
Well,
my
not me specifically, but the major demand across the board, in at least in the northern parts, has been for representation of other backward classes, women of other backward classes, um, uh, both in local governance as well as in the legislatures. In fact, women's reservation bill has been stalled for so long, largely on the demand that OBC reservation should be incorporated. There is sort of quota for SC/STs, but not for OBCs. So that was the main demand.
that you talked about the Nitish Kumar argument, right?
Yeah, yeah. So Nitish raised it way back in 1996, 97 itself. But since then, it has kind of caught on. He articulated it in the Lok Sabha Standing Committee, but since then it has kind of caught on. Now, if you notice, even the Congress is talking about OBC reservation. They criticized, they supported the women's reservation bill in Parliament, but they also, with the caveat that it doesn't include reservation for OBCs, which is one of the demands that the Congress has raised in connection with the women's reservation. So they support that demand for OBC reservation.
Yeah, that we are probably talking about in the past 20 years or something like 20 to 30 years, right?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Ever since the sort of the commencement of this whole process of reservation for women, at least in the legislatures, uh, since 1996, that has been the demand.
My question was little beyond the scope of this time. I was talking about the pre-independent independence time formulations in various Indian provinces or whatever different other places where this demand for proportionate representation was taking up, and so many demands in that separate electorate, including separate electorate, which
Yeah,
was probably the one of the most very famous kind of outstanding kind of singularity it has got. But at the same time, there were several other people who are also arguing for bringing justice by reducing this disparity between various social classes, castes, and all. No? So I was asking about
yeah. No,
in that particular person.
I'm not personally aware of
Yeah.
such demands from within communities. Can we have other questions, please? Because I'm sorry, I will also have to log off because my work is still going on. So if I could answer some more questions, I'll be happy.
Poornima, there's one question in the chat box. Have the bill guarantee number of women would not get elected? There's a question in the chat box.
Yes,
Have
ma'am.
the bill
What does it say?
Have the bill guarantee number of women who would get elected? I think, Blessing, can you just retype it, or you can ask the question, please?
Can you just
Yes.
ask the question?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Have the bill, the reservation bill. Ma'am,
Yeah.
am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah, you are.
Ma'am, have the bill guarantees number of women which can be elected, get
Yes.
elected.
Yes, sure. When you say 33% reservation for women, it basically means you are reserving 33% of the total number of seats. Just like there is reservation for scheduled caste and scheduled tribe seats. There are seats which are reserved only for scheduled caste, where only the scheduled caste candidates can contest. Similarly, there will be seats which will be identified where only women will contest. The tickets can be allocated only to women. So that guarantees whoever wins, whichever party wins, there will be a woman representative in the legislature. So to that extent, it's a guarantee of 33% women getting elected into the legislature, state as well as central legislature.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am. Among the 33 percentage, OBC, how much, ma'am?
There is no provision for OBCs in the current women's reservation bill. There is only reservation for SC/ST women, but not for OBCs.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Any other question? Isn't the reservation dividing? Is that what you asked? I haven't quite understood. Could you just articulate your question? Could you ask the question?
And there's another, Poornima, there is another comment, that is the present bill does not include OBC women. Does it defeat the very purpose of the bill? That is representation.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that. I mean, there is no OBC reservation even for men in legislatures. There is reservation for SC/STs, but there is no OBC reservation for men in general elections. So while the demand is there, the women's reservation bill lacks in so many things. I mean, it definitely lacks in OBC reservation, but it also doesn't provide for reservation, for instance, in the Rajya Sabha or in the state legislative councils. So it's still a work in process, in progress. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's kind of defeating the very purpose of it, because come on, the 33% women getting into parliament as opposed to only 14% women being there is a step forward. So of course it can be amended, it can be and how much of percentage then to reserve for OBCs will be a question that can be asked only after the OBC census, for instance. There can be an argument on that. So first you can conduct an OBC census and then decide how much of reservation to give to OBCs. So yeah, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's defeating the very purpose of it. Any other question? I have some raised hands looking at it. Someone called Amal Sani has raised hand. Please ask your questions. If there are no more questions, can we just wind up then?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right.
Okay. There's one more question. There's just one more question in the chat.
Yeah.
Whether the policy of reservation of women can act as an effective instrument for their empowerment. I repeat, whether the policy of women reservation, whether the policy of reservation for women can act as an effective instrument for their empowerment. I'll just repeat the question, whether the policy of reservation of women can act as an effective instrument for their empowerment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because you are electing women to the lawmaking bodies, which is you can influence policy direction. Not just in case of women-centric legislation, but also as a larger sort of instrument of change in the society, which law is. I think it's a definite it's a definite positive step in the process of empowerment of women. Most definitely.
I think there's just one more, that's the clarification of the earlier question, whether reservation can create an imbalance or whether it can divide the society.
Yeah, well, are we so much in harmony right now? I think first we have to look at what is balance and what is harmony in the society. I think more women in legislatures provide more harmony and balance to the society than women remaining outside it. Right now the imbalance is that there is only 14% women in parliament. That is what I would call disharmony and imbalance. It's unfair that for 50% of the population, you have only 14% reservation in the highest legislature, and in state legislature even less, 10%. 10% women. Himachal Assembly has only one woman, which wouldn't you say that's imbalance? So we need to correct that imbalance. So I would say it'll lead to more harmony and a sense of balance in the society rather than divisions.
Okay,